Thank you very much for inviting me here. I am not part of the oil and gas community. I'm first and foremost a physicist who became an HPC professional. My job title, which is very grandiose and somewhat meaningless in my opinion, is Chief Business Development Officer for a Spanish startup. But today I'm really here to talk about my two passions, and both of them come under this title. My first is diversifying this community. This is one specialist niche, the oil and gas niche of HPC, but HPC desperately needs to diversify. And my second passion, which comes straight after that, is about getting HPC to more people. So what Trish Damkroger was talking about this morning. And I'm in a very lucky position that my job, as well as my hobby, which is women in HPC, but my day job, both of those two things allow me to do that on an almost daily basis. So I'm in a great position. So thank you very much to the organizers of this conference for inviting me here to evangelize to you about why we need to diversify, how to do it, and why you need to be paying attention to it, and why just because you think everything's okay where you are, that's not sufficient. And I hope that in the next 30 minutes or so, I can convince you that you need to go back to your home organization, to your desk, and pay some attention to this, not just to the code in front of you. So I want to start with a little bit of an experiment, because Jan admitted to me that for the first time in a long time, he didn't collect gender data about the attendees this year. Oversight on his part. But can I therefore ask you, you're going to hate me for this, folks, but you've just had lunch, so I view this as exercise. Can I ask you to all stand up if you feel able to? Please stand up. Laptops and all, bring them with you. Okay, everybody standing. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the fact that you're standing with full stomachs and digesting. Okay, have a good look around, how many people there are in the room. Right. If you view yourself, and this is a personal thing, if you view yourself as a white man, my apologies, white men, for singling you out, but if you view yourself as a white man, please sit down. Okay, so for a community, HPC has a reputation, particularly in the US, of being dominated by white men. This is pretty damn good. I wouldn't want to put a number on this because I'm terrible at estimating, but I don't know, 30%, maybe not 50, 30 to 40, I'd say. Okay, let's get a bit more uncomfortable. If you view yourself as a man, please sit down. I am so sorry, ladies. I am really, really sorry. So, tip number one to take away from today, never do this. You should never single out the underrepresented group. But I don't know how many women there are here. This is actually pretty good in my experience, but I'd say 15%, give or take a little bit. Thank you, ladies. Please sit down. Thank you. As I said, you should never do that, right? Because I've just made all those women feel incredibly uncomfortable, which is inclusivity fail 101. Okay, so let me go back to the title of my talk. What do I mean by the word access? Well, I'm kind of stretching the use of the word here, and as I said when I started, I have two passions. I'm here to get more women and actually other underrepresented groups. I'm female, so I started with women because, you know, it's an easy target. We're 50% of the human population. It's kind of obvious that you're female most of the time, whereas other things that we may well view as underrepresented are harder to get a handle on. They tend to perhaps vary depending on where you are in the world. Different racial groups are minorities in different countries. Women is so easy as a starting point, and yet we haven't even scratched the surface of fixing that. So by access, I mean that, but I also mean access from the point of view of getting more of the human race to see the potential of what we do. What we do is phenomenal. We break down the barriers of science with HPC and parallel programming. One of the reasons I moved into HPC is because really my PhD molecular simulation, I wasn't going to change the world. It was okay, but I saw the ability for what parallel programming could achieve, and I thought, that's what I need to be doing. That's what I need to do if I want to, at the end of my life, realize I've made a difference. So my question then becomes, why doesn't everybody want to work in HPC? This is the most exciting field that the human race has in front of us. It impacts everything that we do. We know this. So why aren't we bigger as a community? And why do we struggle to attract certain groups? So just to point out how difficult this is, I'm not going to ask you to stand up this time, but can I ask you, if you have been involved in any form of recruitment, whether you're a recruitment manager, hiring specialist, or you are just somebody that's been involved in reading a CV or being on a recruitment panel, can you put your hand up? Okay, so a large proportion of the people in this room. If you've ever done a recruitment round and thought, gosh, you know what, there wasn't that much in the way of talent there, can you put your hand up? Okay, that's actually I'm surprised it's that small a number. A lot of the time when I ask that question, most of the hands go back up again. A lot of people will tell you that HPC has a talent shortage. We struggle to recruit. And in the anecdotal data I have, one of the problems we have is a lack of data, by the way, but the anecdotal data that we have is that is true. There is a lack of talent. We need more urgently than we have. So this whole access thing goes two ways. It's about getting HPC out to new communities. You're a community, you already get it, but potentially you need to go and talk to the other people in your organizations and see where they can also use HPC. But it's also getting everybody out there to realize how great what we're doing is and making them believe that they should be part of our community. But just in case you don't agree that we should have more women, I have to do a little bit on the diversity dividend. Hopefully, this is preaching to the converted, and this is just ammunition for you to go back to your organizations and tell other people who are skeptics. But this is really well understood, right? And I've picked on women here. I could talk to you about this all day long, about the diversity dividend, but it's things like return on equity goes up when you have more board members on your executive board. If you are in research, your patents will go up, your citation rates will go up. If women were properly included in the global workforce, the increase in global output would go up by 25%. It goes beyond women. When you have multiculturalness in your groups, in your research, you enhance your team performance. Team IQ is now a concept, and we know that team IQ outperforms the best IQ of the individual in the team. When you make your team diverse, that goes even higher. So this is just a good thing to do. It makes business sense. It's not just nice to have, it's a must-have. So what about where we are today? Well, what I can tell you is I do not know how many women there are in HPC. I started Women in HPC 5 years ago, partly to answer that question, and honestly, I haven't been able to answer it to my desired level of accuracy yet. But what I can tell you is where the problem may be. If we look at our pipeline, HPC generally comes from the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And you look at the doctoral degrees awarded in the US in 2015, 25% of engineering graduates were female, 52% of natural sciences were female. That's a very broad brush, right? 52% natural sciences, physics, chemistry. It's the whole big, bad world of everything that's not engineering. But if you drill down, and I've managed to do that more effectively in Europe, where they have better breakdowns of stuff, so go and talk to the NSF about how bad they are at breaking down their data, please. But if you look at that, the lowest number you get is 17% in chemistry. Most of them are above 20%. When you look at the computing workforce, in the US, it's 25% women. When you look a little bit more deeply, you realize that things like women of color, 3%. So I went and Googled oil and gas in preparation for coming and talking to you. 22% which is viewed as terrible compared to other industries. So my question to you is, where do we think we are in HPC? People that have been on the SC committee are not allowed to answer. Any ideas? Okay, well, I was on the SC Supercomputing Conference Committee for a few years, and so I do have insider knowledge. And I will tell you that last year's supercomputing conference was 13% female. So when people tell you that this problem belongs in schools, we need to spend all our time worrying about 6-year-old girls because by the time they're 7, their biases have kicked in. If we're going to blame it all on college education, I'm sorry, but we can't. We are not getting what the college education should be giving us. We should be over 20% if we were to get what is coming through the pipeline. So another takeaway for you today is that this is our problem. We cannot just talk about it being a problem that's in schools and spend all our money and initiatives on programs in schools. That's a very important part of the equation, don't get me wrong, but we as a community cannot ignore that 13%. We should be appalled and ashamed by it, because our talent is actually our most expensive asset. Our hardware, our power, our software, it all relies on the human beings able to use it and put it together. But when our asset, our most expensive asset, is lacking diversity, we're not making best use of the available talent. And I would also say that the problem gets a little bit more complicated, because it's not just about getting these graduates out of their graduate programs into HPC, it's about what happens after. So again, we don't have a huge amount of data about HPC, but we are in the STEM community. We're very heavily related to the computing community, particularly when you talk about things such as the Excel computing project that we heard about this morning. Most of the people working on that are from a computer science background. So one of the best things to look at is the retention of the computer science community. So there is some good news here. 80% of women surveyed in, I think, 2014 said that they love their work in technology. Actually, STEM, sorry. Yeah, it is, yeah, it's STEM. This is great, until you realize that 56% of women leave their organizations in the mid-level point in their career. 49% of those, half of those women that have left, so roughly a quarter of the female workforce, go on to jobs, so they're still working, but they go on to jobs that do not use their computing knowledge and training. They are completely taking themselves out of the workforce. The training that they spent all that time in LNG understanding, they're leaving it behind. 32% of the women surveyed said they were very likely to quit their jobs within the next year. That seems a bit at odds with the 80% that say they love their work. I can't explain to you what's really going on here. All I've got are the numbers. I can give you some suggestions, but what I would again say is that this is a really big problem. The other thing is parental leave. A study published just last week in PNAS has found that 43% of women leave full-time STEM employment after their first child. So the 43%, a lot of people will tell you that women leave, don't get promoted because they are become parents. That 43% is not the full 56%, for starters. But secondly, this is impacting men as well. 23% of new fathers also leave STEM. STEM has a problem. It isn't family friendly. Human beings procreate. You could argue that's the one thing human beings do. Science aside, all the good things we do aside, human beings procreate. So we need to accommodate that in our workforce. And apparently, we are not doing that very well. So what can we do to change? Well, first and foremost, I have no silver bullet for you. And again, I'm scratching the surface here about what you can and can't do. And there's a lot more that goes into this. But the first thing I would say is we need data. I have been saying this for 5 years. I feel like a broken record. and yet we're still not collecting it. Everybody, if you have an HPC group, which I'm assuming you do because you're at an HPC-related conference, I need you to go back to your organization and start counting. And I need you to share that. This is not about shaming people. This is about understanding our current situation. Because if you don't benchmark, you can't improve. One of the things that STEM, in particular, has been really bad for, given that we're scientists, is benchmarking and then evaluating what we're doing when it comes to these initiatives. There have now been found that there's a number of initiatives out there which have failed spectacularly, and not just failed, but made the situation worse. Okay? We don't know how to solve this, therefore we have to evaluate what we're doing. We shouldn't beat ourselves up about getting it wrong, but we do need to know we've got it wrong. It's like science 101, how to use a scientific method, right? So please, go back, benchmark, share your data. Do ask people to self-declare, whatever demographic it is, by the way, don't assume ever. There's a whole set of best practice I can give you if you're interested in this. But benchmark, benchmark, benchmark. And then when you put practices in place, you'll be able to evaluate whether you've had a positive difference. Which brings me to my second one. Implement a workable inclusion strategy. So when I talked about this a couple of years ago, I used to come up with all these bullet points, all the things you can do, which is fantastic. Lots of different things you can do. And what I've realized is a lot of us work in a big organization. HPC is one part of it. The beauty of HPC is that we sit across everything, right? HPC touches every aspect of what the human race is capable of. But that quite often means that the HPC work is within a larger organization, which probably has a diversity or inclusion strategy. What's not working is that strategy coming down and focusing on the particular group, i.e. HPC. Whether it's having a positive impact elsewhere in the organization, I'm sort of not interested in, because I'm interested in the people in this room. What we do know is that we are making no progress in HPC, and therefore we need to start tailoring our strategies to our HPC workforce. So every single group should have a workable inclusion strategy tailored to the needs of your group. What is wrong with your group? What's not functioning well? How can you improve inclusion? And I'm deliberately using the word inclusion here, not diversity. Again, if you'd spoken to me 2 years ago, I'd have said diversity, diversity, equity, equity. The problem with diversity is when it backfires. So, the classic story is somebody who's diverse is hired, not because they're diverse, but they're hired into a non-diverse group. There's no deliberate poor behavior, but they don't feel included. Lots of different reasons why that could be, right? And I'm sure we all know somebody who's not felt included. When you don't feel included, your performance drops. You start questioning why you're there. Almost every woman I've ever talked to about this has viewed themselves as being there at some point in their life because they're female. For a very long time, I genuinely thought I got my PhD post because I was female. It took an awful long time to figure out that wasn't true. As soon as you start thinking that way, you internalize it, you spend far too much time worrying about it, your performance tanks. The rest of the team notices this and starts thinking the same thing. Are they only here because they're diverse? Oh my gosh, we hire people because they're diverse rather than because they got any talent. Oh my gosh, women are terrible. That's the extreme end, or whatever demographic we're talking about. It spirals out of control really quickly. That person eventually leaves. The team feels terrible because they viewed this was put upon them somehow. Diversity fail. So rather than diversity strategies, we should have inclusion strategies. Because when you have inclusion, diversity just happens. And inclusion is about making everybody better. Not the people that you view are underrepresented. It's about making it better for everybody to be there. Because you know what? Just because women apparently don't like going to the pub because they've got to do the childcare run doesn't mean there aren't men who also don't want to go to the pub. So the classic of moving your business meetings out of the pub, which was in the 1990s, was talked about as a strategy for including women more, actually benefits men too, just a smaller number of them. So we need to talk about policies that are beneficial for everybody and start just improving the way we operate as organizations. When we do that, we have happier staff. The few underrepresented staff are more passionate, do better, they become role models. People coming in see happy underrepresented groups. Suddenly you're an attractive place to work. Diversity just happens. So educate is the next one. This really comes as part of your inclusion strategy and should be the thing I really focus on here. But educate about everything I've just said. Talk about things such as unconscious bias. I'm sure you've all heard of that, but do it correctly. Some unconscious bias training backfires and actually makes people more biased. Because, by the way, you never get rid of your unconscious bias, ever. It's just there. It's a human thing. Imposter syndrome, stereotype threat, all of these words that now churn around in the ether, we need to properly understand them. And the other thing that I think is highly underrated is coaching and mentorship. There are lots of studies out there that if you're in an underrepresented group, you're less likely to be offered the job, you're less likely to be offered a high salary, and you don't get mentorship. So we need to actively put in place processes to make sure everybody has these opportunities. I wish it wasn't necessary, but we do actually have to actively address that. It does seem a bit contradictory to what I just said about work on inclusion rather than diversity, but you should actually be offering these opportunities to all staff. One of the things that I never expected to do as part of Women in HPC was to spend about half of my workshops on skills, basic skills. And what I found is the men who come also benefit. I did it because the women were saying, wait, my colleagues have been told how to do this and I haven't, so we started doing these sessions, but the men are also enjoying coming and learning about these topics. So I want to focus on the second key word in this, democratizing. As I've kind of spent most of this time talking about diversity because I'm assuming that's the thing that most of you know least about. But I really wanted to spend a few minutes talking about how we can change things in terms of access to improve the situation as well. So what I really want to do is modernize the way we do HPC training. I'm happy to say that we've moved on from chalk and board. I was taught with chalk and board as a physicist, that's the way I learned. But actually, aside from the fact that we don't use chalk and board anymore, we basically teach in the same way that computing has always been taught. And I think it's time to move into the 21st century, because I think we're stuck in the 1960s. Again, this partly comes from my experience as Women in HPC. I have run a couple of Women in HPC training events, which I never wanted to do, but I did. And so some women absolutely detest the idea, right? So fair enough, don't come, not a problem. But the women who did come, the first course I ever ran, of 28 people in the room, 26 of them told me that they'd been too scared to come before, and they knew everything I was telling them. So there's a problem with the way we teach, first and foremost because of that, and secondly because we could learn faster. We're still lecturing we lecture to physicists and chemists as if they're computer scientists. They don't need to know everything you need to know about computer science in order to use HPC effectively. So we need to really reevaluate that. Brent Gordon mentioned yesterday the carpentries. That is one of the best examples of innovation in computing education that's happening for professionals. We need to roll that out further. We need to do more. HPC carpentry is coming, but really that's kind of the entry level, how to SSH and things like that. So we really need to focus on how to make HPC education better. I also want to say, can we please make HPC easier to use? Because I'm going to pick on my husband here. He is one of the people that's on the MPI forum, does amazing things. And then I say to him, do you realize you've just made it even harder for a physicist to use MPI? Yes, what you did is amazing, but you've just made it even harder. We've got to remember, if you're somebody who's writing the bottom level of HPC, you're providing hardware, it is a tool for the rest of the community. We don't want those people to become expert computer scientists because it puts the computer scientists out of a job. What we want is for the entire world to make use of parallel programming in HPC. But what we keep doing is making it harder. GPUs, in my opinion, are one of the biggest problems there, and I think Dan Stanzioni mentioned this quite eloquently this morning. Their users don't want that kind of hardware. It's too hard. They don't have time to port their codes. They just want to log on and get science. So let's please start actually focusing and paying attention to the user experience. That is a growing field in the rest of the technology sector. There now are user experience people. Why are we not doing that too? So there was a whistle-stop tour of lots of things that I think we can do to make HPC go further and expand the community. I would say I'll come full circle and come back to my passion, which is women in HPC. And I would love it if you joined Women in HPC. Women in HPC is for everybody because it is about the underrepresentation of women. And I keep saying that we cannot do that without men being involved in the conversation. It is free to join as a member, as an individual member. We currently have 9 organizations that are chapters or affiliates. And I was thrilled to announce earlier this year that Intel have come on board as our first corporate champion. And I'm allowed to say, I just didn't put it on the slide, but I'm allowed to say that TAC will be joining us as champion later this year. So we're growing as an organization, and this is about driving change. So just to finish, thank you ever so much. If you have questions, I am around for the rest of the day, but feel free to email me as well, and I'll just leave that URL up there. Thank you.
Any questions? We have a question over here.
I guess I have a question that's maybe a little out of your wheelhouse, but so how does HPC compare to other CS specializations like cybersecurity or things like that?
So there is actually a report by I think it's the Athena Factor report, but I can look it up. I've actually got it on my laptop because I was looking at this last night. It is still one of the worst. There are a few down there at 15%. HPC is not on that list, by the way. But cybersecurity, I want to say 14-ish. We are still definitely down the bottom. That's what's really shocking. And the 13% is the best I have seen. The PGAS conference that I helped run a few years ago was 5%, and all 5% were local staff, including myself. And I'm not a PGAS person. I went along because I was one of the organizers.
Question over here. Yes, a couple of them here.
Hi, Toni. Thanks. That was a good talk. I'm curious about the historical data. I feel like over the years of my career that it's been getting better in terms of women and representation. I don't feel quite as alone as I used to. But I'm curious to know if you have some of that historical data and if you could comment on that.
So we have no historical data for HPC because until I formed Women in HPC in 2014, nobody was counting. There is some work being done to look at authors on papers. It's quite hard just to classify it as an HPC paper. So we were looking at things like SC publications, but it's hard. But I would say computing in general, we are at a low. In 1991, 36% of the workforce in the US in computing was female. We're now at 22. So I'm hoping that HPC is bucking the trend, but it's not good if we look beyond HPC at the STEM or technology workforce.
We'll take one more question over here.
Just a comment. I'm a campus champion, and in our group, a huge number of women are very active, and most of them are in leadership. So there are many professors, researchers, and system admin. Many of them are women.
That, I know it's just a comment, but it's a really fascinating observation. One of the hypotheses, and I don't think it's been proven yet, is that when women do stay in STEM, they find it apparently, the word I saw was easier, and I don't like that word, but it's easier for them to succeed and move into leadership. I suspect what's going on is that if you stick it out, you're a really tough cookie. I mean, I quite often say when I work with organizations to come up with inclusion policies and inclusion strategies, I say the people you really need to be talking to are the ones that have left. So what you're seeing is not, as far as I understand, is not unusual. There's a debate about why.
Join me in thanking Toni again, and she'll be around during after the